Ilara stood motionless in the center of the crowded marketplace, the harsh sunlight of a distant world casting long shadows across the worn stone ground. Around her, alien voices filled the air, speaking in languages she didn't understand. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to stay calm. The market was full of strange faces, many of them filled with curiosity or cruelty. Some were human, others were creatures she couldn't begin to identify. They were all gathered here for one reason: to see her sold. Her hands were shackled, the cold metal biting into her wrists, a constant reminder of her new reality. A reality she hadn't chosen, but one thrust upon her by her own family. Ilara had always been taught to obey, to follow the rules, and to accept whatever life handed her. But this was something different. She never imagined her family would go so far as to sell her. Her family. They had always been distant, more concerned with their own ambitions than with her well-being. When they had been approached with an offer to sell her as a servant to the highest bidder, they hadn't hesitated. It wasn't even about the money for them anymore. It was about the power. They saw her as a tool, something to be used and discarded when no longer needed. Ilara felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she recalled her parents' cold expressions when they had handed her over. They hadn't cared about her feelings, her future, or her dreams. All they had cared about was the payment they would receive for her. But now, standing in the heart of the marketplace, the reality of her situation was sinking in. She wasn't just being sold. She was being reduced to nothing more than property. A part of her wanted to scream, to run, to fight. But the guards around her kept their eyes trained on her every move, making sure she didn't try anything foolish. The auctioneer, a tall, lanky alien with a sharp nose and cold eyes, stepped forward, raising a hand to silence the crowd. His voice echoed across the plaza, announcing her arrival. Up for auction today, a rare specimen from the planet Earth, a human servant, once belonging to the wealthy family of House Calderon. She is young, strong, and full of potential, the auctioneer said, his words dripping with disdain. Let the bidding begin. Ilara's heart sank as the crowd began to murmur, eager for their chance to own her. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, but there was no way out. She was trapped, her fate in the hands of strangers who only saw her as a commodity. As the bid started, she tried not to listen. The numbers kept rising, and each bid made her feel smaller, more insignificant. She was being sold, her value determined by nothing more than the sum of her parts, her strength, her ability to work, and her obedience. It didn't matter that she was a living, breathing being with thoughts, feelings, and hopes. To them, she was nothing more than an object. Then, suddenly, something caught her attention. A new voice rose above the others, calm and steady, with a hint of something unspoken in it. I'll take her, the voice said. Ilara's gaze flicked up, and she saw him standing there, tall, broad-shouldered, and human. His eyes were dark, not like the cold stares of the others, but filled with something she couldn't quite place. Compassion, or was it just curiosity? The auctioneer looked at the newcomer with a raised eyebrow. You're bidding for her. You do realize she's a slave, not some sort of pet or companion? He asked with a sneer. The man didn't flinch. I know what I'm buying, he replied simply, his voice steady. But I'm not buying a slave. I'm buying a person, someone who deserves to be free. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. For the first time since the sale began, she felt a flicker of hope. Could this man be different from the others? Could he see her as something more than just an object to own? The auctioneer hesitated for a moment before nodding, clearly sensing that there was no point in arguing. Very well, he said. The human will have her. The price will be. He named the amount, which was much higher than Ilara had expected. But the man didn't hesitate. He handed over the necessary credits without a second thought. The moment the transaction was complete, Ilara felt the weight of her shackles lift. The cold chains that had bound her to this nightmare fell to the ground with a metallic clink. For a moment, she stood still, unable to believe what had just happened. The human approached her slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. He didn't rush or make her feel like she was a burden. His eyes softened as they met hers, and Ilara felt a strange mix of emotions swirl within her: fear, confusion, and a small seed of hope. "I'm Dylan," the human said softly. "You're free now. I won't hurt you." Ilara didn't know how to respond. She was free. For the first time in her life, she was free. She looked at the man, the one who had just bought her not for power or control, but to set her free. Could he really be trusted? But one thing was certain: her life had just taken a turn. She didn't know what awaited her, but for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if there was something better out there. The first few days after Ilara was freed were strange, even though they were the first days she had felt any sense of safety in her entire life. Dylan didn't force her to do anything. He gave her space, allowed her time to adjust, and never once made her feel like a prisoner in his home. Ilara spent most of her time in the small room Dylan had set aside for her. It wasn't much, just a bed, a small table, and a chair, but it felt like a refuge, a place where she could finally breathe. The room had a window that looked out into the city below, and sometimes, when the sun was setting, she would sit by the window and watch the streets fill with people of all kinds. The sight fascinated her, as she had never experienced life outside the controlled walls of her family's estate. But even in the quiet moments, the thoughts never stopped. Ilara's mind was a whirlwind of questions. She had spent so long living in fear, forced to follow orders, never allowed to make a single choice for herself. What now? How could she start over when her past was always chasing her? She had been treated as property, and now she was supposed to live freely, but she wasn't sure how. One morning, as she sat near the window, Dylan knocked softly at the door. His voice, calm and warm, broke the silence. "Hey, Ilara. I was thinking we could go into the city today. There's a market I go to sometimes. You could see how things work here, if you want." Ilara turned toward the door, surprised. "You want me to go with you?" Dylan's voice softened. "I think it might help. It's a big world out there, and you've spent so much time locked away. I want you to feel like you're part of it, not just hiding from it." For a moment, Ilara hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready to step outside. The world felt too big, too overwhelming. But Dylan's words lingered in her mind. He was offering her something she never thought she would have: a choice. She stood up slowly, her legs a little unsteady, and nodded. "Okay, I'll go." Dylan smiled. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to make her feel a little more at ease. He led her down the hall and out of the building, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. As they walked through the streets, Ilara felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She hadn't been outside in years, and the crowded marketplace was a far cry from the quiet, isolated life she had known. The sights, sounds, and smells were overwhelming at first. People of all shapes and sizes moved through the market, some pushing carts of colorful fruits and vegetables, others hawking wares that ranged from strange alien technology to clothing she had never seen before. The air was thick with the smell of spices, food being cooked, and the hum of voices in a dozen languages. As they walked, Ilara kept close to Dylan, her eyes wide as she took everything in. She had never seen such diversity in one place. Some of the people here were human, like Dylan, but many were not. Tall, thin beings with glowing eyes, short, squat creatures with wrinkled faces, and even a few who seemed to float above the ground, their bodies surrounded by shimmering energy. It was all so new to her, so different from the world she had known. Dylan seemed at ease in the market, greeting people here and there. Ilara followed him, trying to keep up, but there was so much to take in that it was hard to focus on anything for long. She had never been allowed to speak to anyone before, but now she felt like an outsider, unsure of how to interact with the people around her. They stopped at a vendor selling fruits she had never seen before. Dylan picked up a small round fruit that was deep green with yellow streaks running through it. He turned to Ilara with a grin. "Try this. It's really good." Ilara stared at the fruit for a moment, then took it from his hand. Hesitantly, she bit into it. The flavor burst in her mouth, sweet, tangy, and refreshing. She blinked, surprised by how good it was. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could enjoy something simple, without fear of punishment or reprimand. "This is amazing," she said quietly, glancing up at Dylan. Dylan chuckled. "I'm glad you like it. There's so much more to explore." As they walked through the market, Ilara started to relax. She even found herself talking to a few of the vendors. They asked her questions about her home world, where she came from, and what she thought of the city. Dylan translated for her when necessary, but she started to realize that the world outside wasn't as frightening as she had imagined. It was big and chaotic, yes, but it was also full of possibility. Later, as they sat in a quiet corner of the market, enjoying the food they had picked up, Ilara turned to Dylan. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." Dylan looked at her, his expression sincere. "You don't have to thank me, Ilara. You're free now. That's all I want for you." Ilara smiled, though it was still a little hesitant. She wasn't sure how to express what she was feeling. Freedom. It was still a foreign concept to her. But in that moment, sitting in the sun with Dylan, eating strange fruit from a faraway market, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to be free. For the first time, Ilara allowed herself to believe that there could be a future for her outside of the shadows of her past. The world was big, and it was hers to explore. And with Dylan by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could start to live again. Ilara stood silently next to Dylan as they walked away from the auction block. The loud noises and harsh whispers of the crowd faded into the distance, but a feeling of unease still clung to her. She wasn't used to this, being free, being treated like a person, not property. For as long as she could remember, she had always been seen as something to be used, controlled, and sold. Dylan was beside her, walking at a steady pace, his eyes focused ahead. He didn't look back at her, but there was something in the way he moved that made Ilara wonder if he was just as uncertain as she was. He had saved her, yes, but what did that really mean? What did he expect from her now? She had heard stories about humans. Most of them were about their violence, their wars, and their greed. But there were also rumors of humans who could be kind, who could care. Was Dylan one of those humans, or was he simply another person who saw her as an object? Her thoughts were interrupted as Dylan spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "We're almost there," he said, his tone calm and steady. "I have a place where you can stay for now. It's not much, but it's safe." Ilara glanced at him, unsure how to respond. She had been locked away in a cage for so long that the idea of safety felt strange to her. But the way Dylan spoke with so much certainty made her think that maybe she could trust him, at least a little. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the bustling city surrounding them. Ilara's mind raced. She didn't know what to expect in this new life. Her family had sold her, her future was uncertain, and now she was walking alongside a human who had promised to give her freedom. But freedom came with its own challenges. It wasn't something she was sure she knew how to handle. Eventually, they arrived at a small building on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it looked peaceful. Dylan led her inside, and Ilara took in her surroundings. The walls were plain, the furniture simple, but there was a warmth in the air that made her feel like she could finally relax, if only for a moment. "This is where I stay," Dylan said, closing the door behind them. "I know it's not luxurious, but it's safe, and it's all I have." Ilara stood by the door, unsure of what to do next. She didn't know how to act in this strange place. Everything was new. For so long, she had been told what to do, where to go, and how to behave. Now she was left with nothing but her own thoughts and the freedom that Dylan had given her. She turned to him. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly, her voice hesitant. Dylan stopped in his tracks, clearly caught off guard by the question. He glanced back at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want anything from you," he said slowly. "I'm not here to control you, Ilara. I'm here to help you, if you want it." Ilara blinked, confused. Help. She wasn't sure what to make of that. All her life, she had been used, sold, and traded, and now someone was offering her help without expecting anything in return. It didn't make sense. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "Why would you do this? You could have bought anything or anyone. Why me?" Dylan met her gaze, and this time, she saw something different in his eyes, something softer. "I didn't buy you because you were a slave," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I bought you because you're a person, and you deserve a chance at a better life. No one should be treated like property, especially not you." Ilara felt something stir inside her. It was a strange feeling, one she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, a small spark that flickered in the depths of her heart. "I don't know how to live a free life," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never had the chance." Dylan's expression softened, and he stepped closer. "I know it's hard," he said gently, "but you don't have to do it alone. I'll help you. I'll show you how to live on your own terms, how to make your own choices." Ilara looked down at the floor, her thoughts swirling. She had never imagined that anyone, let alone a human, would offer her a life like this. But what if it was too good to be true? What if this was all just another trick, another way for her to be controlled? But when she looked back up at Dylan, she saw something in his eyes that made her believe him. He wasn't looking at her like an object to be owned. He wasn't expecting anything from her. He was offering her a chance to be something more than the slave she had been forced to be. "I don't know if I can trust you," Ilara said quietly, her voice filled with doubt. Dylan nodded, understanding. "That's okay. Trust takes time. But I promise, I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I just want to help." Ilara took a deep breath. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a choice. A choice to be free. And maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe in this human who had shown her kindness when no one else had. Ilara had begun to settle into a routine with Dylan. Every day felt like a new opportunity, even though her mind often drifted back to the life she had left behind. She spent time learning about the world outside the walls of her family's estate, a world filled with diversity and opportunity. Dylan had been patient, always explaining things to her, showing her how to interact with people, and teaching her how to make her own choices. But there were still moments when her past would creep back into her thoughts, moments when she would remember the cruelty of her family and the life she had been forced into. One afternoon, as Ilara sat by the window in her room, gazing out at the bustling streets below, she heard a knock at the door. Dylan's voice came through, calm as usual. "Ilara, there's someone here to see you." She frowned, standing up. "Who is it?" "I'm not sure, but they're looking for you. They say they know you." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? She didn't have any friends, and the only people she had known before were her family. Her stomach tightened with unease as she walked toward the door, her mind racing with possibilities. When she opened the door, she was met by a figure she hadn't expected. A tall, thin alien with sharp features and a cold, calculating look in his eyes. His skin was a pale shade of green, and his clothes were fine, well-crafted, like something a wealthy merchant might wear. But it wasn't his appearance that made Ilara's blood run cold. It was the look of recognition in his eyes. "Ilara," the alien said, his voice smooth but filled with a sense of authority. "It's been a long time." Ilara took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "Gorak," she whispered, barely able to believe it. Gorak was her cousin, one of the few people from her family she had once trusted. But even he had turned his back on her when her family made their decision. "I heard you were here, living with a human," Gorak said, his gaze flickering briefly toward Dylan, who stood behind Ilara, watching the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "I never imagined you'd end up like this. Freed by a human, of all things." Ilara straightened, forcing herself to stand tall. "What do you want, Gorak?" Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding in her chest. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew it couldn't be good. Gorak's smile was cold and cruel. "I want what's mine," he said, stepping forward. "You're still part of the family, Ilara, and your family wants you back." Ilara's heart sank. She had known this day would come. She had known her family wouldn't just let her go, even after they had sold her. They would want to reclaim her, control her again. It was never about her well-being. It was about ownership, power, and control. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, the old chains that had bound her to them still lingering in the air. "I'm not going back with you, Gorak," Ilara said firmly, her voice strong. "Now. I'm free. I'm not your property anymore, and I won't be anyone's again." Gorak's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ilara thought he might lash out. But instead, he smiled, a cruel, calculating smile. "You think you can escape so easily. You think that human will protect you. You're nothing but a piece of property to him, just like you were to us. You'll come back to the family, whether you want to or not." Ilara's blood ran cold. She knew her family would stop at nothing to reclaim her, but Dylan wasn't like them. He had bought her freedom, and she had no intention of returning to a life of servitude. Dylan stepped forward, his voice calm but unwavering. "I don't think you understand," he said, his eyes locking with Gorak's. "Ilara is free now. No one owns her. If you think you can take her back, you're going to have to go through me first." For a moment, there was silence. Ilara looked from Dylan to Gorak, uncertain of what would happen next. Gorak's gaze shifted between them, a mix of disbelief and anger in his eyes. He hadn't expected anyone to stand up to him, especially not a human. But then, to Ilara's surprise, Gorak didn't retaliate. Instead, he stepped back, his eyes flicking to the door. "This isn't over, Ilara," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Your family will come for you. You can't hide forever." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ilara standing there, her heart still racing. Dylan moved to her side, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Ilara nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was really okay. Her past had come rushing back, and she knew this encounter was only the beginning. Her family wouldn't stop until they had her back, and they would go to any lengths to get her. But for the first time in her life, Ilara knew something was different. Dylan was standing beside her, and he had promised to protect her. She wasn't alone anymore. "I'll be fine," she said quietly, looking up at him. "But I have to be ready. I can't run forever." Dylan nodded. "We'll face it together. Whatever comes, we'll handle it." Ilara smiled, the first real smile she had given in days. For the first time, she truly believed that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. She wasn't the scared, helpless girl she had been before. She was stronger now, and with Dylan by her side, she was ready to fight for her freedom. The days after Gorak's visit passed quickly, and Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Every time the door opened, she jumped, expecting to see Gorak or someone else from her family standing there, demanding she return. But as the days went by, it became clear that they weren't going to give up easily. Ilara's family had power, and they would do whatever it took to get her back. Dylan noticed the change in her too. He saw the way her eyes would dart to the door, the way her shoulders tensed whenever someone approached. He knew she was afraid. Afraid of her past catching up to her. Afraid of being dragged back into a life she had just escaped. One evening, as Ilara sat quietly at the small table in their home, Dylan entered the room. He had a serious look on his face, one that Ilara had come to recognize over the last few weeks. He wasn't one to worry easily, but something had him on edge. "Ilara," he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "I think we need to talk." Ilara looked up from her hands, where she had been absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the table. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep the fear from creeping into her voice. "I think your family is planning something," Dylan said. "I don't know what, but I've been hearing things. It's not over yet. They won't stop looking for you." Ilara's heart sank. She had been trying to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, Gorek's visit had been a fluke. But now, hearing Dylan's words, the reality of her situation hit her all over again. She wasn't safe. Not yet. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dylan sighed, his expression softening. "I'm not sure, but I won't let them take you, Ilara. I promise." Ilara's eyes filled with gratitude, but a small part of her couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Her family had power, more than she had ever realized. They had resources, allies, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim her. "I don't want to be a burden to you," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "Gee, you've already done so much for me." Dylan shook his head, stepping closer to her. "You're not a burden. You're a person, Ilara. You're worth fighting for." Ilara felt a surge of warmth in her chest. It was strange, this feeling of being cared for, of being valued. For so long, she had been taught that her worth was only tied to what she could do for others, especially her family. But Dylan saw her for who she really was, not as a possession, but as a person. That night, they stayed up late, talking about what to do next. Dylan had a few friends in the city, people he trusted, mercenaries, and allies who could help if things got worse. They decided to reach out to them, to prepare for whatever might come. Dylan would stand by her side, and together, they would defend the new life she had started to build. The next few days were tense. Ilara's mind was never far from the fear of being found. But Dylan kept reassuring her, telling her that they were ready, that they would face whatever came together. Then one evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, the worst happened. There was a loud knock at the door, and Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She froze, staring at Dylan, who was already standing, moving toward the door with purpose. "Ilara," he said quietly, "stay behind me." Dylan opened the door slowly, revealing a small group of armed men standing outside. They were all wearing dark uniforms, and their faces were hidden behind masks. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized one of them. It was Gorek. "You don't belong here, Ilara," he said coldly, his eyes scanning the room. "Come with us." Ilara's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to fight, but she knew it wouldn't help. These men weren't here for a friendly conversation. They were here to take her back, and they wouldn't leave without her. Dylan stepped forward, standing between Ilara and the men. "I told you before, Gorak," he said firmly. "She's not going anywhere with you." Gorek's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and threatening. "She's ours. You're just a human. You don't have the power to protect her." Ilara could see the anger in Dylan's eyes, but he didn't flinch. "I don't care about your power," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "I'm not letting you take her." For a moment, there was a tense silence. The armed men shifted, clearly waiting for their leader's command. But Dylan stood his ground, his body tense, ready to protect Ilara at all costs. "I'll give you one chance to leave," Dylan said, his voice firm. "Walk away, and you won't regret it." Gorek's expression twisted with rage, but instead of giving the order to attack, he took a step back. "This isn't over, Ilara," he said coldly. "Your family will not forget this." With that, the men turned and walked away, disappearing into the growing darkness of the night. Ilara's legs felt like they might give way beneath her, and she sank into a chair, her heart still pounding in her chest. Dylan turned to her, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Ilara nodded, her voice trembling. I'm okay. But what now? They'll be back, won't they? Dylan sat down next to her, taking her hand in his. We'll be ready. We'll protect what's ours. In that moment, Ilara realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Dylan, and he had promised to fight for her. They would stand together, no matter what. And for the first time in a long time, Ilara believed that maybe, just maybe, she could finally have the life she had always dreamed of. Freedom, safety, and love. Ilara couldn't stop thinking about what had happened that night. The encounter with Gorek and his men had shaken her to the core. For a moment, she had believed they might take her back. The fear, the old memories rushed back in waves, but Dylan had been there, standing between her and the danger, and for the first time, Ilara felt like she had someone who would fight for her. The next few days were quiet, but the tension was always present. Dylan kept them on edge, always alert, preparing for whatever might come next. He had reached out to his allies, and while they weren't yet sure if Gorek and his men would return, Dylan wanted to be ready. Ilara stayed close to Dylan, no longer venturing far from the small house. The thought of being out in the open again, vulnerable, terrified her. She couldn't bear the idea of being taken again. But there was a part of her that knew she couldn't hide forever. She had to face her past, face the people who saw her as nothing more than a piece of property. One morning, as Ilara sat in the small kitchen, Dylan walked in with a serious look on his face. He had a communicator in his hand, and his expression was tense. Ilara, he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. I think we need to talk. Ilara set down the mug of tea she had been holding and looked up at him. She could see the weight of something on his shoulders, something important. What is it? There's a message, he said, handing her the communicator. It's from your family. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the device. She didn't want to hear from them. They had already shown her their cruelty, their willingness to use her for their own gain. But Dylan was watching her, and she knew he wouldn't push her if she didn't want to listen. After a long pause, she took the communicator from him, her fingers trembling slightly. She pressed a button, and a cold, familiar voice filled the room. Ilara. Gorek's voice crackled from the device. We've had enough of this. You will return to us. Your family demands it. If you do not comply, we will take action. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The message was clear. Her family wasn't going to let her go easily. They would come for her again, and they would do whatever it took to reclaim her. But there was something different in Gorek's voice this time. It wasn't just a threat. There was something final about it. Ilara knew they would stop at nothing, that they would use whatever resources they had to drag her back into their control. The power they had over her once was still alive, and it was just a matter of time before they made their move. Dylan took a step closer to her, his presence a steadying force. Are you okay? He asked softly. Ilara nodded, her eyes staring at the communicator in her hand. The message was short, but its weight was enough to shake her to the core. They'll come for me, she whispered. They won't stop until they have me back. We're not going to let that happen, Dylan said firmly. We'll be ready for them. I won't let them take you. Ilara's heart swelled with emotion. Dylan's determination, his unwavering support, meant everything to her. She had spent her entire life being told what to do, where to go, and how to behave. Now, for the first time, she had someone who cared about her, someone who was willing to fight for her freedom. I don't want to go back, Ilara said, her voice breaking slightly. I don't want to be their property again. You won't be, Dylan said, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. I'm not going to let anyone take you. We'll fight this together, Ilara. Whatever happens, you're not alone. For the first time in a long while, Ilara allowed herself to believe him. Dylan was her ally, her protector, and she would not face this alone. The past might be chasing her, but she had the strength to stand tall, to fight for the life she deserved, the life of freedom, a life without fear. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Dylan reached out to his contacts, and they began to make plans. Ilara knew her family would come for her, and when they did, she had to be ready. She couldn't keep running from her past forever. It was time to face it head-on. The night before the confrontation, Ilara couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing, her thoughts consumed with what was about to happen. She knew Dylan was doing everything he could to protect her, but the fear was still there, gnawing at her from the inside. What if it wasn't enough? What if they were too strong? What if, despite everything, her family found a way to take her back? She stood by the window, staring out into the night, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. She felt a hand on her back, and when she turned, she saw Dylan standing behind her, his eyes filled with understanding. "You're thinking too much," he said softly, his voice comforting. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Ilara swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding. "I know, but I'm scared, Dylan. I don't want to lose this." "You won't," he said with certainty. "We're stronger than they think, and I'll fight for you, I promise." Ilara didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, she realized something important. She was no longer the scared girl who had been sold by her family. She was stronger now, braver, and she had a future, one that she would fight for with everything she had. The day had finally come. Ilara could feel it in the air, the weight of the silence around them, the tension that had been building for weeks. Dylan had gathered everyone they could trust, allies from different corners of the city. They had prepared as much as they could. But now, standing at the door, waiting for what would come next, Ilara felt a mixture of fear and hope. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the small house. Ilara stood by the window, looking out at the quiet streets, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't sure what would happen when her family arrived, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going back. Not to a life of control and fear. Not to the family who had sold her without a second thought. Dylan entered the room, his footsteps light but steady. He paused for a moment, looking at her with a mixture of concern and determination. "Ilara," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We've got this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Ilara turned toward him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She didn't know what to say. The words felt small compared to the weight of the moment, but she nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never felt this strong, this ready to fight for her future. "I'm ready," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure if the words were meant for him or for herself. Dylan gave her a reassuring smile and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay close to me. We're not just fighting for you, Ilara. We're fighting for the life you deserve." As the minutes passed, the distant sounds of the city began to fade. It was almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ilara could hear the low hum of voices outside, the movement of people preparing, just as they were. Then the silence was broken by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She turned toward Dylan, who gave her one last nod before stepping forward. "We're ready," he said softly, his eyes filled with resolve. The door creaked open, and Ilara's stomach tightened. The sight that greeted her was both expected and terrifying. A group of her family soldiers stood at the threshold, their expressions hard and determined. And at the front, as she had feared, was Gorek. "Ilara." Gorek's voice rang out, cold and commanding. "It's time to come home. You don't belong here, with these people." His eyes flicked dismissively toward Dylan, who stood beside Ilara, his stance unwavering. Ilara could feel her heart racing in her chest, but she refused to let the fear control her. She wasn't that frightened girl anymore. She wasn't the one who had been sold or forced to obey. She was a person, and she had her own voice now. "I'm not going back, Gorak," Ilara said, her voice strong and clear. "I've made my choice. I'm free, and I won't be anyone's property again." For a moment, Gorak said nothing, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "You think you can stand up to us?" he sneered. "You're just a runaway. A slave who thinks she can live like this, free of consequence. Ilara could feel her body tense, but Dylan stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with authority. She's not a slave, Gorak, and you can't take her. We won't let you. Gorak's eyes flicked toward Dylan, surprise flashing in his gaze. He hadn't expected this human to stand his ground, to protect her. But Dylan didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of fear. He had made his choice too. He was fighting for Ilara, and nothing was going to change that. You're not welcome here, Dylan said, his voice low but steady. Leave, now, or things will get ugly. Ilara looked up at him, her heart swelling with pride. Dylan wasn't just fighting for her freedom. He was standing up to her family, to the people who had tried to control her. And in doing so, he was giving her the power to stand up for herself too. For a moment, the tension hung in the air, thick and charged. Ilara could see the anger in Gorak's eyes, but she also saw something else. Hesitation. He hadn't expected this kind of resistance. He hadn't expected Dylan to be willing to go this far to protect her. And then, with a sharp motion, Gorak stepped back, signaling to his men. This isn't over, Ilara, he said, his voice filled with malice. You may have won today, but you won't be able to hide forever. Your family will come for you. But Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't back down. I'm not hiding, she said quietly, but firmly. I'm living. And if you think you can take that from me, you're wrong. With that, Gorak and his men turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Ilara exhaled deeply, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She looked up at Dylan, who stood beside her, his expression unreadable but his presence comforting. We did it, she whispered. Dylan nodded, his hand finding hers. Yeah, we did. But Ilara knew this wasn't the end. She knew that her family wouldn't stop, not until they had her back. But now she had something they couldn't take: freedom, strength, and the love of someone who truly cared for her. As the night settled around them, Ilara realized that this was just the beginning. She had fought for her freedom, and with Dylan by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Ilara wasn't afraid of what the future held. She was ready to live it on her own terms.